clearly a dangerous time for journalists. It's always been a dangerous time for journalists, but it seems to be even more so now. There's 46 journalists killed last year. There's a record 262 imprisoned this year. We're being called the enemy of the people, prostitutes apparently in both India and the Philippines. So nothing like coining new terms. There are fake news laws coming up everywhere, and online harassment is a pretty new thing now that's also being used against lots of us. So we have a good panel to discuss this. We have Umar, who has the incredibly dubious distinction of having been attacked in more ways than you can imagine. He's been kidnapped, he's been tortured, he's been sued, he's been trolled online. It's not a good CV to have, but it's good that we have him to talk about that. At the fine, we have Febriana Firdaus, who's been attacked online fairly mercilessly and trolled in Indonesia for reporting that she's done. And next to me is Aung, who wound up with 2 months in jail in Myanmar for flying a drone over the capital and narrowly escaping being charged with the Official Secrets Act, which would have been conceivably up to 14 years in jail. So not a good panel, not a good time. One of the things I want to do before we got into the panel was just to talk a little bit more about online attacks, because this is a new phenomenon, and we tend to say, online harassment, and it means many different things to many different people. So I think it would just be helpful to sort of draw up a little taxonomy of what that is, so that when we talk, we have a better sense of specifically what we're talking about. And so if you bear with me for a bit, I just want to walk through this, and then one other quick point, and then we'll go over to the panels. So when we talk about online attacks, there are really a whole range of different types of things. There's just your classic insults, but then there's also all the sexually oriented threats, rape threats and so on, especially against women. There are physical threats. There are physical threats that are general, which is, we're going to go come beat you up. And then there's specific threats, which is like, we know where you are and we're going to come beat you up. There's doxing, where they release information about you or sometimes about your family or your friends. There's release of images of you that you didn't want released. There's extortion and blackmail, obviously. There's spoofing and fake accounts, and we can talk about those things. I mean, Umar apparently has 23 children and a daughter he never knew he had. You can be stalked online, and of course physically. There's swatting, which is where they call out essentially a police SWAT team on your house by claiming that there is a hostage situation at your house, and a whole bunch of heavily armed men show up there ready to shoot someone, and in fact there have been real instances of that. And there are other kinds of remote attacks where they order a whole bunch of pizzas to be delivered to your house, which is annoying and certainly gets in the way of doing work, although less dangerous than swatting. But they've also been weaponizing other sorts of attacks, such as calling you out for, say, child abuse, reporting you for child abuse, and then all of a sudden you spend a lot of time having to defend yourself against untrue charges. And then there are different types of attacks where they can be attacks about a story that you did, a very specific story, or they can be attacks against just your organization, the failing New York Times, fake CNN, or they can be individuals. They can just go after you. And that can be based on all sorts of things: your gender, your ethnicity, religion, sexuality, political leanings. There can be types of targets which are news organizations or individuals or teams or even cross-organizational teams like, say, ICIJ. And then there are many different reasons for attacks: to drown out coverage, to cast doubt on the accuracy of your story, to undermine the reputation of you or your organization, to make you think much harder before you write a type of story that will get attacked, and obviously to inflict physical harm. And then there's all kinds of different types of attackers. Sometimes there's a spontaneous crowd. They genuinely hate your story. It's not a troll army. It's not something set up. They just don't like what you wrote. or it could be a spontaneous crowd that follows a meme that some smart guy has come up with, and and people just genuinely chase it. Or it can be a coordinated attack from like a fringe group that has set something up, or for that matter, it could be a coordinated attack from a government or some other institution. It can be through bots, it can be through human troll armies that are paid for. Sometimes it can actually be genuine human beings, strange as that may sound. And it's important to know all these things because it helps you think about how to think about, to analyze what the threat is to you, right? How much of it is an in-person physical risk? How much of it is just a lot of noise? How much of it is things like swatting? How much is it to get in the way of your normal operations or life? And so on. You can see that. I don't really need to go through all of that. And that's important because, and I want to get into this a little later on as well, because for online and offline threats, it's critical, I think, beyond individuals, and we have two freelancers and someone who works for a news organization here. Beyond the individual protecting themselves, we really also have to think about what it is that news organizations have to do in order to do risk analysis before they set reporters out on what could be dangerous assignments. You should do physical assessment, what the threats might be, what equipment you might need to protect yourself, what's a way to get out of a place. You need to do a digital risk assessment, which some of you were in the session yesterday. We talked about how you do a threat analysis on digital things. You obviously need to do a legal assessment to understand what risks there are. And increasingly I've come to believe that you need to do a social media analysis before you publish as well, so you know what kind of attacks will come from you on social. And you need to do this both at the reporting phase, because you need to be safe during reporting, and you need to do this at the publishing phase, because you need to be safe after a story publishes. And then I think the other issue becomes who's in charge, who decides whether a story is safe, whether it's too far, or what the rules are. Is it the reporters that make those decisions? Is it the story editor that makes those decisions? Or is it somebody else that makes those decisions? And I can tell you at Reuters, we have a very clear line. We have a whole set of protocols. Reporters don't get to make those decisions. Editors don't get to make those decisions. We have actually a separate chain of command that can overrule all of them. And the reason for that is because we don't want reporters getting so caught up in the story that they'll take an extra risk. We want someone to sit and say, I don't care how good the story is, you're not doing that. So anyway, with all of that out of the way, and sorry I burnt up all of that time, let me just start with the panel. So Umar, I did give you a rather long...
I'm just trying to avoid the spotlight.
Okay. Yes, it's always good to avoid the spotlight sometimes. So you want to tell us a little bit about the various things that have happened to you and sort of how that might have affected your reporting and how you think about being safe in reporting in future? You should grab the mic.
Sorry?
The mic.
Yeah. Actually, as you mentioned earlier, that I have a kind of dubious distinction of becoming victim in many ways. So it has made a good story in a sense that I can relate to different victims of different categories. First of all, for the first time, I was targeted in 2004. That was my, you can say, third year in the journalism. And then a car hit me from the back, and it hit me twice. And it left me with compound fracture, and we couldn't know that who were the attackers. But it had left me bedridden for next 6 months. And then the next attack occurred in 2010. And then I was kidnapped, taken away to some unknown place, and they stripped me naked. I was tortured. They shaved my head, they shaved my eyebrows, and they had dumped me some hundreds of kilometers outside of the city. And then I came back alone from there. Then I came back and I spoke up. I went to the television channel and I said that this happened with me. And this is something my captives didn't want me to speak. They had been warning me against me. They warned less about my work and more about against the speaking up, that you won't speak. If you do, we can pick you again. And I nodded in agreement. Obviously, I was in their custody. But later I made a decision that I must speak out, otherwise they will blackmail me for the whole life. After some time, nobody would know what happened with me. But when I will do a story they don't like, they will call me, they will harass me, and they will, issue further threats. This is another story, I realized that more than physical torture, it is a psychological torture, and I went through trauma for almost a year without letting anybody know, while living in a country where, visiting a psychiatrist means something, people will be joking that, no, he has gone to a position there where he has to visit a psychiatrist. And there was a point I could not mention with my family because it was already in panic. They wanted me to leave the journalism, that I didn't want to. So I had to fight my own fight. When I would go back, people would just trying to read my body language, whether he's shaken or not. So I would put up a brave face. Then there was a psychological war that my captors would be thinking that has I fallen the line or not. So I started writing again what I had been writing before. It was a difficult time, but I'm happy that I stood the grounds. And although I felt harassment, they kept chasing me after the incident in order to, submit me into the silence. Again, after some time, this incident occurred. I did a story, and there was a quick action on the story, and the guy who was the target of my story, he was removed from his position, and he was left with no option just to, follow me in the court. He lodged a case against me, and initially there was a pressure that I should reveal the source. I did not. This is another story that my source was not cooperating with me at that time, but I thought that since he had shared some information with me, I won't reveal it. Then I faced court. They cross-examined me for almost a year, asking unrelated questions like that: where have you been? Have you received an award? Please bring the award, show us. And have you been filing the tax returns? Anything that was unrelated to story, it was asked to me, and I had to produce my tax returns before the court. I had to produce my passport that I had been traveling abroad because the plaintiff wanted to establish that I'm a liar. And court helped him. This is another story. Obviously, I never regretted what I did, but anyway, the decision was against me. The trolling on the social media, it is a different aspect, and if I'm not exaggerated, I think that I'm the, no journalist is trolled like me. On the social media, there are people who have invented, fabricated different stories about me, and sometimes would they said, when you were attacked in 2010, we felt pity for you, now we realize you need another beating. And they would post the picture of my, that were released after the torture. Then other stories, for example, I was doing the Panama Papers, and I had been, playing the role of a fact checker during the court. The trial was being conducted against Sharif family, the Prime Minister whose family was named in the Panama Papers. Later, at some point, I realized that the court is rigging the process now instead of doing the fair trial. There I objected, and then again trolling started against me, and there were accusers who would say that I had brokered a deal, and there was such a classic fabrication against me. Had it not been against me, I would have awarded the person who did the fabrication, and it was that I have done a hush-up deal, and I have been given an apartment in Dubai, and a long story. Then about the present government, whenever I would write anything against me, a vilification campaign started. Then an imagined girl appeared who supposedly was my daughter. I never know about her. And she was 18-year-old, and I had forced her out of the home because she had relation with some boy. and there she circulated my phone number, asking other people to call me, and I received a barrage of calls for the next 4 or 5 days, just hurling abuses. I stopped taking the calls. Then later, a gentleman came to me. He was a retired person, and after discussing his issue, he said that there is a personal question I wanted to ask you. I said, okay, I have stopped mining. Please ask what you have. So he said that I got your number from the social media. My number is so popular now. Anybody, if you want to get now, it's available on the social media, and I have only one number. So he said that there was mentioned that you have 23 children. Again, I don't know about it. So what I did, instead of being harassed, I realized that this social media, it is the nature of the social media, and these are the people who are into such things. If I have to be on the social media, I must be ready for such things, and I use these trolling for improve my resilience level, improve my tolerance level, and it's working so far. And they say every choice has its price. So if you are doing some work, and we all want to do some work which could trigger resentment, which could trigger criticism, which could trigger controversy. So eventually the detractors are the target of your work. They also react. So I take these attacks with that spirit that these people are reacting.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a second. Febriana, you want to tell us about your experience and how
it's
that's
always
affected
make me
you?
sad when I'm listening to other people experience like me, journalists being harassed and everything, and my hand is still cold because I feel like so angry why we have to experience this. So this is my story. In 2016, I cover a lot about so we experienced this LGBT crackdown in Indonesia in 2016, and then before that, there is an International People Tribunal who sentenced Indonesia guilty for the genocide in my country. So in 1965, the background is Cold War. Remember that some country in Southeast Asia, we experienced the 1965 communist purge, I think also including Singapore, right? And then at that time that 500,000 and then until 2 million alleged communist Indonesia being kidnapped and killed, and the rest is being arrested. And then it's still cold, sorry. Yeah, and then with the fact that now the international community admit that tragedy, and then we bring it into symposium of 1965. So the government said everything. So I'm the only reporter who just merely doing my job, covering that story. And at the time, the retired general who like allegedly involved in the killing of these people, they collaborate with the Islam militant group who also helped them actually in the past to kill these alleged communists. They set another symposium who opposed the symposium that's set by the government, and I covered that story. And at the time, the Islamist group expelled me from the building, so I just like face to face with them. And then after that, it's the troll. It's followed by the troll, and then one of the troll saying that look out, the troll online saying that look out, floating around us women with fake hijabs, they're actually communist activists and LGBT lover. Febriana Firdaus, don't be fooled by her hijab. So it's like online, and they also like spread my photo, and of course my family is worried with me. And then and thanks to the Indonesian alien journalists, they set my safety protocol for me, like security protocol, and they bring me to the safe house. But after that, until today, I'm still afraid to write about the communist thing in Bahasa Indonesia. So I prefer to write in English. So that's it.
So they did have an impact on you. They did
Yes.
manage to make you stop writing.
Yeah,
about
because
something.
if I write in Bahasa Indonesia, then my family will read it and they will panic. It's because this communist thing is very something that very sensitive in my because communist is atheist. In my country, being atheist is like something like
Anybody can say.
yes.
Let me come back to you in a little bit, but let's hear what happened to Aung and and so on.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So first of all, comparing to the story they had, mine is like not really a big one.
It's not a contest.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I started working in this industry as a fixer. Around 2012, as you may already know, that the country Myanmar is opening and there are like more and more foreigners coming in. I started working as a fixer, and also in the same time, the nationalist ideology is also growing as a result of the military propaganda against the NLD government, leading by the Aung San Suu Kyi. I was like when I'm covering a nationalist offense, we could not avoid these events at the time because these events were so popular. Like they were always against the NLD or the activists. They were campaigning everything. So I have to be there, as a fixer. So whenever I'm at these kind of events, they like my pictures were taken like not just by a single person, but by many person, and it was or how to say distributed on social media, especially Facebook, for many times, and then sometimes I had also received death threats. In 2015, there was a student uprising because of the National Education Bill. So at the time, I was accused that I'm the one who is controlling these campaigns from behind, and I'm just taking the pictures of these activists. And then later, like things are getting worse. So in 2016, there was an attack by Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army in Bangladesh border. So after the attack, there was a video published by this group on YouTube, and then somebody took a screenshot of the one picture from the video, and then they accused that the guy in the video was me. And they took the screenshot of that video, and also they mixed together with other of my pictures, like when I was covering at the peace conference or in the parliament or at the press conference. And then they made a campaign like, okay, this guy is a member of ARSA and he is getting into a state event and he's pretending as a journalist. Why don't the Myanmar police is not arresting this guy? So I didn't take it very seriously. I thought that it was just Facebook. It was my mistake. So a few days later, I was called by some intelligence guy, and they interrogated me. It was not very a serious interrogation. It was just at the tea shop, and I had to report them for like 3 months, like wherever I'm going, wherever I'm traveling. So then in 2017, October, and also, sorry, I missed one thing. Some of my friends suggested me that I should have a lawsuit against these people. But, I thought that, as you may already know, judiciary system in Myanmar is kind of too bad, and I don't want to waste my time. That's why I didn't take any action. So then in 2017, October, I was working as a fixer for TRT War. Some of you may see this story on news, like we were flying a drone near the parliament fence in the government capital, Naypyidaw, and just after a few minutes, there was a policeman showed up, and then we were brought to the police station. Then we were asked like many questions, and then there were some local journalists showed up at the police station to cover what happened with the journalists and the police. So there was one of the local media. They have written that on Facebook that Aung was accused as a terrorist in 2016. This made authorities more suspicious, and then at the same night we were put into the jail, and we were totally blacked out for 14 days for interrogation. We're not allowed to meet with any other persons. So during the 14 days of the interrogation, I was not asked only about the drone. Like there was only very little bit about the drone, and there was more about like my report, my stories, and also the foreign organization that I have worked with. And they even asked me to translate some of the articles that I have written. And also, one day after we were arrested, my house was raided with like hundreds of soldiers, not even police officers. I didn't know that. But somehow it is also relating to the Reuters journalist. Wallo was working on the story about the raid at my house, and then I somehow sneaked the phone from the intelligence officer, and I could read the story that Reuters had made this story. Then I was quite shocked. It was before these guys were my friends were arrested. So. And I was asked by during the interrogation, I was asked by the police officers that like what's the like they print out all these screenshots that were distributed last year on Facebook and asked me to prove what's the difference between this guy from the armed force and me. I had no idea to what, but I made up somehow, and I was like, okay, I'm a bit chubby, and things like that. So then we were sentenced for 2 months, according to the 1934 aerodrome, and we still had to face import-export, and the foreigners had to face immigration as well. Then on December 28th, our case was dropped. On the 12th December, Wallo and Joshua from Reuters, they were arrested. I think they did not want to detain two groups of journalists at the same time, and our case was not as sensitive as the Reuters case. Then our case was dropped. So shall I keep saying about the consequence, or
Sure.
yeah?
Going. I can move this through to wherever you want to go to. Okay.
Yeah, sure. So actually, journalism used to be like an honorable job in Myanmar. Of course, we had like a very serious censorship and other military regime. Like people really respect journalists because they were covering the people uprising, 2007 uprising, and many things. So they thought that journalism used to be a very dangerous job. But when NLD got into power, military had a lot of propaganda against NLD, and also at the time, journalists were also writing the truth, which is that NLD is right. At the time NLD was good, but not now. Anyway, so and then gradually journalists were victimized for political purposes. Like nationalist groups, they were defending journalists, like journalists are traitors of the country. You are selling the information of the country to like foreign organization, foreign countries. And then people started aggressive to talk to journalists. So personally, my face was kind of popular because of the case, and also my photo was shared on social media for many times. So sometimes, when I'm covering in the field, people came to me and asked like, hey, are you coming here to give us trouble? Can you please leave? Or things like that I have experienced. At one point, I was covering the child labor story in some remote part of Yemen, and then there was a guy approaching to me, and he asked like, oh, I know that who you are, and I have seen your picture on Facebook. Are you coming here for giving us trouble? Please don't give trouble. The children are just walking peacefully, blah blah blah. So I have faced that kind of thing, and also my family. Suggested me not to keep working as a journalist, and also same as friends. And also there's another thing which is a bit dangerous for press freedom, is that they are like self-censorship is much growing because of like how general public is treating to the journalists, which is a bit dangerous for press freedom, I think. Yeah.
So let me ask all three of you, if you think back, either, what might you have done differently, now that you know some of the consequences of what's happened because of your reporting, what might you have done differently to protect yourself, or what would you think of doing differently in the future, or what advice would you give people who are in sort of the same situation? What can you do differently to be safer? I mean, Umar, do you want to take that first?
I think despite having all what I said, I think we should calculate the risk. Never feel scared from taking risk, but before doing it, please calculate it. There should be, chances of your survival as well while, taking such risks. But when you are in trouble, try to stand the ground. This is what I have learned. When I was being tortured, there was a feeling in my mind that gave me strength that, I'm being troubled for the work I did, and I didn't have any regret what I was doing. We should not feel scared from speaking truth, but certainly, this is a relative term, and you must be aware of the situation. In 2014, I guess, one day I received a call, and the caller was saying he is some militant leader from Afghanistan that I still doubt, and he said that you are working for the Jews and Western forces, and you go abroad to take dictation and try to impose back in Pakistan, and you are working against us. And we know where your children live, where they go to school, where your parents are, and where your family is. And he did not end with me. Later he, rang to my wife. My wife had 2 SIMs, phone SIMs, and he rang at both. So he was aware that, how many phone numbers she has, and repeated the same. And then he spoke to my mother. And although over the time the circumstances allowed me, rather taught me that how to manage the fear, I have learned this art, because fear is something, never let it dominate over you, because if the fear prevails, then you lose your decision power, you cannot do it. I know how to manage the fear, but it was very difficult to, how to do the counseling of my family, and I had to do it. Incidentally, I was to travel 3 days after for UK, and my family was insisting, please don't go. Again, there will be any repercussion. The precaution I took from then onward, I stopped sharing my pictures about my foreign visits. So, you must be aware that what kind of forces are lethal, what kind of people are critical. I, for example, in my own country, the religion is a very sensitive matter. I don't indulge into religious debate too much, because anybody can make his or her own interpretation, and that can be used against me, to kill me. So, mostly I remain focused on the political issues, and that is my subject, and this is what I'm doing. It's not necessary that I should comment on everything happening under the sun.
Febriana, do you want to talk about what things you think might help, especially as a freelancer? What are the, the sorts of things that would help?
Actually, at the time I worried about the closeness between the retired military general and the Muslim militants. I turned to fire. So, and then I don't regret at all what I wrote about. That's the topic that I should write about. So, but I regret that I expect anyone around me will care about me. So I think the only advice from me, if I advise to myself, if I can go back and then I will try to talk with myself, just don't relate to anyone. Just rely on yourself. You have to be strong. I mean, like, if you expect, for example, small thing that your editor will care, perhaps they will not going to care. I mean, like, you will get disappointed, for example. But you just have to take care of yourself first. So you have to be strong with yourself first. And if you can, just set your own security protocol. So I just did. So in 2016, it's happened to me, and apparently in 2017, it's also happened to me. So I don't know what happened, but they spread my photo again, and they say that I'm new communist, and it's until in the village in the village where my mom lives, and all my family so panic because someone spread my photo with saying new communist and with some of the colleagues, but everyone like remember my face a lot after 2016. So what I did, that I just like rely on myself, and then I turn off all the location, and then I log my social media on in Twitter. I tweet like something like nothing happened, like normally, and I went to the holiday. That's it. So I take the day off for that, and I call my family all that I'm okay. I'm the safest place on the earth. So don't worry. So I think we have to rely on ourselves, especially if you're freelance.
Oh, you're also freelance.
Yeah. So it is better to face it if we are harassed or defamed or accused of something bad. So I regret that, as my friends suggested that to take action when I was harassed, I should do that. Actually I didn't do it, and this thing get worse and worse. And also, it is different if you are threatened. If you get threatened, I think you should be prepared. Or if you are going to dangerous areas, or you should be prepared. As a freelancer, you should be prepared with, like, the best thing is like family members or the friends. For example, before I was arrested, I was going to the Thai-Burma border, which is a bit sensitive area. So I prepared a little bit, like, how to disable my phone remotely if they cannot contact me, or who to contact if I'm in trouble. So I came back from this trip, and then 2 days later I joined this TRT crew, and then I was arrested. So my friend already got, luckily, somehow, my friend already got the information, and they could disable my phone and computer remotely. So within like 3-4 days, so police cannot access to some sensitive data in my devices. Yeah.
So I want to open it up to the floor, but before I do that, I'm going to call upon a floor member. Kunda, you run a newspaper. So, clearly we have people here who are individual reporters. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about the safety of your staff and what sorts of things you do in order to keep them safe? Yeah.
We have a protocol as such, but going by our own experience, there are certain rules we have to follow.
I think you have to hold the mic up, because
yeah.
otherwise no one's going to hear you.
There are certain rules that we try to follow, which is because we've been attacked by both the extreme left and the extreme right in Nepal.
It's a sign you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, so I think keeping a low profile is part of the job, is not to be too outspoken, because your story tells everything. You don't have to sort of underline it with very belligerent Facebook blurbs or tweets to emphasize what you've written. Let the story say what you want to say. Try not to draw attention to yourself for a story. And know your vulnerabilities before you start rocking the boat. So like if you have your family, are they vulnerable? because they usually, as we heard, get back at your family. Do you have any personal secrets of your own, that could be used to blackmail you? And don't make too many enemies at the same time. One enemy at a time. I think that's always, because when an attack happens and you've really, made too many enemies, you don't know where it's coming from. And when we were attacked, for example, physically, our office was vandalized, I was assaulted. It was, we knew exactly who was responsible because, it was a story we did that morning in that morning's paper. The other precautions we try to get our office to do is to use encrypted messenger services. For example, not even WhatsApp anymore, but maybe more like Wire, and then for email, Proton Mail, VPNs like Signal and Freedom to cover your tracks, so you cannot be followed. I mean, if you're doing sensitive stories, you can be sure that the security, government, and other agencies are reading your mail. It can be, it's like sending a postcard. So everyone can read what you're writing. And home. I mean, office and home raids are, as you say, don't keep those things at home, because if you're going to be raided, it's all going to be out there. So the first thing they come after you if they do a home raid is your computer, your PC, and they'll force you to give you a password. So they'll go to your emails first thing, and then they'll take your hard disk. So to have either a backup or not to keep anything secret in there. And if you have anything secret, to keep it in a USB port. And let's not tweet this, because otherwise our enemies will know exactly what I've told you. And so, which is what we did. And for example, back home, when I had to go into exile, I knew that the drone I kept in my home was actually illegal because I didn't have a permit. So I had to actually hide my drone, or tell my office people to go to my house and hide my drone, because they could use that to implicate me on whatever charges they wanted. And if your judicial system is infiltrated, I think that's where, when the judiciary, and you can't go to the courts, and if you get a summons, then you really are in a dilemma, which is what happened to us, is do you attend to the court summons and go to the court? Or if you know it's going to be infiltrated, and what happened in our case, the lawyer said, just don't go to the courts, go into hiding or leave the country. And leaving the country is again a problem, because you need to have sources in the immigration, police, private sources who can tell you confidential information. So when you find out that your name is on some kind of a blacklist, they can't leave the country, so you don't even go to the airport. You try to find other means to get out. And I think, what Umar was saying was about not showing fear or pain, because I think that really gives the other side the satisfaction to knowing that whatever they're doing is working. I think showing fear is really so when we were in exile, for example, we kept out bringing out the paper, we kept out doing hard-hitting stories, showing that the methods they're using doesn't work. And that's always demoralizing for the other side. So in the end, I think it's really about choosing your enemies for priority and for impact, and not doing everything at the same time, and also not sort of realizing that it's not what you say, but how you say it. Mm-hmm. That is important. And maybe you don't want to be too confrontational at a certain time. You have to be strategic about it. So that's what we discuss in our office and how we time our stories. I'm usually told if there is a sensitive story, if one of our female reporters is being harassed by a male source, then we take certain precautions about it. We send along a male colleague for the interview, things like that. But there's nothing in writing as such, and maybe you give me an idea, Reg, that maybe we should have some kind of a protocol in the office. Thank you.
Thanks, Gunda. I just add one quick thing on from Drew's session on physical security yesterday, which was a great line, which I've always remembered, is you could write about organized crime figures. You can call them a crook, but don't get personal. You can call him a crook, but don't call him fat. You can call him a crook, but don't mention that he has a mistress, unless it's important to the story. But don't do it for the sake of doing it. Pick your shots. What really matters. So anyway, if people have questions, you can come up to the mic. Anyone?
My name is Ruth. I work for Free Press Unlimited, based in the Netherlands. We work worldwide, also on the safety of journalists. I was wondering what local structures are available in the countries where you are that can help journalists that are attacked or harassed. And I'd also like to know if after your experience, whether you've had some counseling offered or you followed some counseling because quite traumatic experiences. So, 2 questions. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I live in a country where security situation, everybody realized that he was in a vulnerable condition, especially during the wave of terrorism. Also, going to psychiatrist, it looks odd. It is relatively limited to the elite class. The people go there. Otherwise, the counseling is from within your community, within your network. I don't think at least I didn't go. People outside Pakistan, they suggested me, and honestly, I heard the term post-traumatic stress disorder for the first time after my kidnapping incident, because somebody said that now you will go through this phase. I said that what does it mean? I didn't have the idea. And but in the meanwhile, I keep provoking myself. For example, in an odd situation where I want to do something where I'm reluctant to do, I provoke myself that, are not you a brave man? Is this a situation you are being tested at this moment? So stand your ground. And also, what gives me strength was that I did no wrong. At least I should have the idea. If I have done something wrong, I could have apologized. Otherwise, there was no point. Even when I was being tortured, another distinction about the pain. When you are in the custody and they beat you, cry as loud as you can, because that satisfies them. And I did it in their custody. And so when you are out, then, even if you feel pain, don't cry, because that gives them satisfaction. But you are away, you can afford to remain silent and not to get unwanted attention. So, when I was being tortured, I was asking them that what wrong I did. So even this was provocative for them, that they would beat me more, that I didn't do anything wrong. So I would say that actually you have gotten a wrong man. I know that you wanted to get somebody else. Actually, it's a case of mistaken identity. And what was the second question? About the protocol?
Local structures that help journalists with legal support or any type of support when you are arrested.
Actually, it varies from newspaper to newspaper. My newspaper was very helpful. But sometimes when they are not trained or they are not sensitized enough that how to treat with the victim, how to take care of them. So I noted that point, but then I put myself in their position that as untrained person or not knowing the trauma, I might be sympathetic with the victim, but not as much as the victim is expecting. But overall, I realized that my news organization, that was very helpful. They stayed with me, and they even offered me, they wanted me to go out for some time. I did not go, that is another story. And I don't suggest other people that stay the ground. The situation may vary from individual to individual. Some people, they have different, they are living in different circumstances, or become more vulnerable. Sometimes the organization is not small enough to take care of you. My organization was big, but being big doesn't mean that the organization will do the job that I have to do. But I must do what I can do as an individual, and the organization has its own role. If you want.
I think in Indonesia we have the Indonesian Press Council, so no one can touch the journalists. So they have to consult with the Press Council. So I'm lucky, I think, in Indonesia, but there is no guarantee that, for example, the latest case, I heard that our college in Kalimantan, he was passed away in the prison. And I don't know why he is in a prison. There is some company accuse him, and then the police say that they secure him, but it turns out that he passed away in the jail. So it's like suspicious for us, perhaps the police starter. And also personally, after the and I think the trial is still happening, like since 2016 until today. So this is also my fault. I have to go to the psychiater like routinely, but I'm so busy with working as a freelance. So I used to take holiday instead of going to the psychiater, because I think Indonesian psychiater is different. Sometimes they ask you to pray. That's not the thing that helps. So I'm like, I'm not religious, but there's something that Indonesian like a little bit different. When you ask God and everything like come back to God. So it's just, I don't understand how to.
I was also asking about this trauma counseling, because it is researched that journalists that go through this kind of experiences, they are also less sharp on assessing their risks in future situations if they haven't dealt with the risk in the first place.
Another reason we don't let them assess their risk.
Sorry?
Another reason we don't let them assess their
Yeah,
risk. Somebody
yeah.
else assess their risk for them.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, recently there was someone from Myanmar Press Council. He was like a high position guy. So he said that we will not help journalists if more journalists were arrested. So this is already answering your question, I think. And also in terms of trauma, but there's one point that local journalists who are working together with you in the field, they help you a lot. They stand from your side. They were doing Facebook campaigns, they were speaking out for you.
In solidarity with
in solidarity, that's great. Also, let's say when I was accused by the local paper, to be honest, it's 11 Media, so they wrote something like that. And then when they came to the court hearing to cover the story, we were like, is there anyone from 11 Media? We just openly asked, and then we were like, please get out. We just said it. So, and about the trauma, it's like I was offered by some organization, but like Umar has told, like we don't really have the kind of tradition. We're like, oh, only foreigners take traumas or something like trauma healings or things like that, So I didn't have anything like that.
Thank you.
I just add, when Walung and Choseo were taken in, we did actually bring a counselor into the office and offered counseling to everyone. The other thing I'll just point out, in Pakistan, there is an initiative for Editors for Safety, which is a really great thing, where editors of the major news organizations are in a WhatsApp group, and if they hear of any of their journalists in trouble for whatever reason, they communicate and they coordinate. In some cases it's don't cover this, we're in negotiations for their release, or in some cases it's make a big stink out of it, even though it's a small regional newspaper, because it has an impact. But they don't have to think about who to contact. They've got a single group where they all talk to each other, which is something worth thinking about for other countries as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Recently, I saw prominent journalists, their career kind of ruined because of what they wrote years back. And unfortunately, I spent most of my 20s writing online, not really thinking that I'll be a journalist someday. So my question is, like, if things start blowing up on the internet, because Umar, you mentioned that you go on holiday, you spend time with your family to try to forget about it. But I would like all of you to kind of, because you all experienced it, how you coped in specific times, like when things blow up on the internet. Yeah.
When you say internet, what do you mean under social media?
Yeah, of course. So probably mostly social media platforms these days.
And actually, our sensitivity level varies from person to person. That when we become sensitive. Initially, when I was trolled, I was a bit worried about it because I considered myself as a respected journalist. But later I realized that the social media has a different culture. Nobody has respect here, and everybody is vulnerable to trolling. So, keeping in this thing in mind, what I do now, I don't read the comments. I only know that how many people have retweeted me, how many people have liked me. Because that would have been a pleasant surprise, because there are very dedicated trolls. Even you have done something uncontroversial, you have posted something uncontroversial, and I noted it, that they start trolling. And there is no point, it's against nobody, but they start trolling. So I have stopped reading their comments. And another thing, as a journalist, because we understand that politicians are not happy with us, and other sections, influential section of society, they are not happy with us, and they consider our questions very stupid quite often. They think so, but we think that we have a right to question. So I happily accept the right of the trolls to troll me and to question me, and I use it for improving my tolerance level. I use it for improving my resilience level. I realize that, it gives me a courage. It is training me to do some bold work that I should not avoid only because somebody will troll me. So, this is how I take it. Yeah, this is how I, alleviate my pain.
Thank you.
There have been a reasonable number of sort of studies and suggestions about how you should deal with trolls. In some cases, people suggest you should engage. In some cases, they say you should block. It really depends. I mean, blocking can be helpful. On the other hand, if there are people actually out to threaten you physically, then blocking is not a good idea because you don't know what's happening. So there's no single answer. There is a woman runs a group called Trollbusters. She's in the U.S. She's starting to do more work internationally. This is a really useful flowchart, which you can't read, but you can find online, which actually takes you through what happens if you're being trolled, and you can go through and look and follow through sort of a various flowchart, this with sorts of different responses. So it's something that, again, there's no right answer to a whole thing, just like there's no right answer to a physical security question or even a legal question. But this is a helpful thing. And then there's some other resources. PEN America has a field guide to online harassment, which is actually very helpful. RSF has done one. The women's organization has put together a physical safety manual. For the freelancers out there, there's an organization called ACOS, a Culture of Safety, which has done some really nice work about improving the conditions of freelancers and making sure that they get treated like staff when they're working with a news organization. And IPI is tracking online attacks. So and this is not comprehensive. This is what took me half an hour to find. So there's plenty of stuff out there if you're looking for resources. Other questions from anyone?
Pakistan, a broadcast journalist. My question is, you have already discussed how to deal with trolls online, but there are two options. The first one, he told us, keeping a low profile when doing a story, or the other is by adopting digital security practices, can we deal with troll armies? So what is the best option? Because Umar already told us that he does not read tweets, but there are journalists who reads comments and they are they feel like very down whenever they read comments. So by adopting some practices, can we deal with this troll armies?
Yeah, I think it's doable. For example, frankly speaking, in my case, when I say I don't bother, for me, I don't bother. But, many people bother, and this is a reality. So how to deal with it? And I again realize that investigative journalism is a solution. That we should have people dedicated for, keeping an eye on the trolls. And there are many cases, there are bots, and we can trace them, because sometimes we realize the same message is being posted by 20 or 25 trolls. So it is doable if we do with work with, for example, in Pakistan, some organizations working on digital rights, they have some softwares like Bytes for All or the other organizations, and in collaboration with them, if we do it and we keep highlighting that the trolls of the political parties or the non-political parties, I think this is the idea in my mind, that this is how can we put them under pressure, that these people, they are harboring trolls or they are the perpetrators, and this is how we push them back.
There's, if you look at organizations, if you look at Rappler, for example, they've built up a whole structure to investigate online harassment, especially of themselves, but in general, sort of exposing troll armies. That's sort of an organizational level decision. It's not something anybody can do by themselves, but they've done it. BuzzFeed has the capability. So that's something that a news organization can think about. The other things that people have done, BuzzFeed, for example, when you join BuzzFeed, they make you set up a separate professional Twitter account, professional Facebook account, so that it's separate, so that you don't have, you have an account that isn't tied to your personal life, and it's not intended for you to be, Joe Schmo at Facebook, Joe Schmo at BuzzFeed. It's just create a professional one so that your life is separate, and you don't have to, your kids and your family are not mingled with your work life. So that's one thing that people can do. The other thing that is a suggestion that they also have is you aggressively go out and just dox yourself. Figure out what is out there that's that you can be vulnerable about you, and then again sort of compartmentalize your life. You want a Facebook account for your family, close it and just keep it for family and friends, and then again have a professional one where you have very little about yourself, so that you can just not have your phone number or your family's phone number.
No, even in my case, I don't use Facebook. I have my accounts there, but I don't use Facebook anymore. The reason being, most of my family members, they are on the Facebook, and when people troll me on the Facebook, this is how my family get panicked. So, and I discourage them come on the Twitter, and I'm on the Twitter, and I don't feel personally that if somebody is trolling. On Facebook, I don't use that account.
It's quite difficult for all of the people, for example, if I have a Facebook account, it would be difficult for me to make another. So I think it's not possible for journalists.
The one suggesting that is from the organization side. Let's suppose Umar, BuzzFeed, like this one. So that is a new one, a new Twitter handle.
I know it can be hard. If you've got 1 million followers, you don't want to give them up. It's tricky. I agree.
I have a question. My name is Shuja. I come from India. I report from, I'm a television journalist, and I report from the conflict zone of Kashmir. Threats both real and offline or online, whatever you call them, are very, common in our areas. And they come from both state and non-state actors. More often than not, what we, find is that when a journalist actually is threatened, there are very limited resources in terms of contacting, platforms, international forums, where the help can be handy. I wanted to know from you if there are such platforms which could be, remembered, if at all there are problems that one can go to.
We had a session before the conference where we talked about threats. One of the things that we did suggest to David Kaplan was GIJN might be able to set up something where it can be a sort of a rapid response helpline. I mean, even if they can't physically do anything,
Exactly.
so that they can start dispensing some advice. This was mostly focused on online. There's again no reason why you couldn't start giving some more assistance with with physical threats. And the Committee to Protect Journalists does now have a rapid response team as well, although that tends to be for people who are already in trouble as opposed to for people who might get in trouble. But I think organizations, Open Society, ACOS, and so on, have been fairly active in trying to get people to adopt more safety protocols. Again, not so much necessarily that you train you to be safe, but to train you to how to think about safety, so that you're better prepared before you go into a situation.
And it could be I think it could be an interesting area to work on if there is a helpline, a global helpline, which could channelize help anywhere in the world if at all a journalist faces a problem.
I think there is unfortunately, unless something bad happens with somebody, nobody believes that he is facing threats, because the reason being, many people have exploited the situation. For example, when I was kidnapped or tortured, many people suggested I should go abroad for some time. I didn't. However, in the meanwhile, some of Pakistani journalists who were abroad, they were using my situations to sensitize such organizations that when he was facing threats, nobody took care of him, and we are facing threat, please help us get asylum here, and they took asylum. So there are also fake cases. Therefore, I remember this July, there was National Counter-Terrorism Authority of Pakistan. They issued a threat alert that a militant has entered into Pakistan from Afghanistan with a target to kill 5 journalists, and my name was among them. So when I shared the letter with my friends abroad, everybody said that they can fly me out anytime, when I want. I was not ready. I was reluctant, but because they know me and they know my background. Had this happened for the first time, there may be people who would be checking from 5 different sources whether this guy is credible or not. So in Pakistan, we have a safety net, what's called, which is being run by Iqbal Hatter. CPJ. No, that is by RSF. They have a local network where the journalist, such journalists in trouble, they contact them, and sometimes they move them to different cities, or they realize that it is too unsecure to live in Pakistan. Sometimes they move them out. So there should be a setup, ideally at the organization level. If not at the organization level, the organization you are working. Otherwise, at the India level, that may also be coordinating abroad as well.
No, that's fine. But what happens is, why I'm saying this, we just had a recent case in our area. A photojournalist was arrested by the National Investigating Agency, which is the premier agency which investigates terror crimes. And he was a freelancer working from a remote place. It turned out he had nothing against him. It took 5 months for people to coordinate efforts locally, go to the courts, get lawyers, and then it was proven out he had nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no case against him. And all this while, everybody was looking forward to help from international organizations, because more often than not, national organizations, end up not helping you. That's why, my query was that if there is no such platform, perhaps this could be a thought process to build on. And if at all there's a helpline which works globally, which channelizes help from all across.
I think Lucy has the answer.
I'll just add a little bit. There is a network called...
You should tell people who you are, Lucy.
I'm Lucy from Media Legal Defence Initiative, and we do provide financial support for legal cases. So I'll come back to that, but there is a network called Journalists in Distress, and that's us, that's CPJ, that's Gregory Peck, that's the international organizations. and everybody's on that network, and you can reach out to them if you have a threat, if you have a case against you, and they will come together and try and provide the support, whether it's medical care or legal services or campaigning or whatever it is that might be helpful for your case. And the idea is that you could contact any one of those organizations on that network, and then they will share it among themselves to help. From a legal perspective, we provide legal financing for journalists if they have a case against them. And the idea as well is that you can apply directly to us through the website, and it's quite a quick turnaround. So that's great once you've already got a case against you, but for physical safety, that's not really going to be so effective. We do proactive cases, and we support journalists to do cases where if you've had a number of threats and the police have failed to investigate, or there's been an attack and there hasn't been an investigation or prosecution, then the state has an obligation to do that investigation and to look for perpetrators. And often there's some lack of willingness from the state, or there's some relationship with the people that attacked you. But nevertheless, it's still always very useful to make the complaints to the police, because then once you have a litany of complaints that haven't been acted on, it gives other avenues for the kind of international pressure and other pressure points on the government for the kind of longer term safety of journalists. And the other thing that I would flag is that there's some quite useful kind of protection manuals for physical safety from Frontline Defenders and Protection International that's on their websites, and that's a kind of, it can help you think about, especially if you're a freelancer and you don't necessarily have the support of an organization, just the steps to think about when thinking about your own physical safety and how to, you know, think about your home and the security around that. But I'll send those links to you and then.
Thank you, Lucy. I think we're out of time. I think that, you know, one of the big takeaways here, I think, from everyone is essentially you should just be prepared, right? You should think about these things in advance. You should have, you know, contingencies in mind, because obviously when something happens, you don't want to be reading the manual. That's a little late. So start thinking about all of these things way, way in advance and plan ahead. So anyway, thank you very much, and thank you to the panel.